Christmas is built on reassurance, familiar songs, ritual comforts, the promise that everything ends safely. That's exactly why it makes such an effective hiding place for horror. When violence slips into a season designed for warmth and order, it feels wrong in a way few other settings can manage. These films weren't meant to become classics. Some were misguided, some were tasteless, and some feel like accidents that somehow made it to screen. But all of them share a strange defiance of good sense. These are Christmas horror films that shouldn't exist, and somehow do. Directed by David Hess to All a Goodnight, is a slasher film that feels fundamentally out of place, not just because of its Christmas setting, but because of its tone. Set in a sorority house during winter break, the film follows a group of young women stalked by a killer dressed in a Santa suit, turning a season of emptiness and quiet into something aggressively hostile. Hess approaches the material with a strange seriousness, lingering on isolation rather than spectacle, and the sorority house becomes less a site of indulgence than a trap sealed off from help. The Christmas elements aren't playful or ironic. They're treated as blunt instruments, used to heighten the sense that nothing about this violence belongs here. What makes the film unsettling isn't ingenuity, but atmosphere. The pacing is uneven, the performance is raw, and the motives murky, yet that roughness gives the film an accidental sincerity. It doesn't wink at the audience. It commits fully to the idea that something rotten has embedded itself into a place meant for celebration. To All a Goodnight feels less like a seasonal experiment and more like a transgression. A reminder that even traditions built on cheer can be hollowed out and repurposed into something cold, joyless, and unrecognizable. Don't Open. Till Christmas pushes the Christmas slasher concept into grim, almost nihilistic territory. Directed by Edmund Purdom and set against a backdrop of London, lit with holiday decorations, the film follows a killer targeting people dressed as Santa Claus, turning a symbol of generosity into a recurring victim rather than a disguise. Purdom treats the season with deliberate indifference. The city itself becomes hostile, crowded yet uncaring, reinforcing the film's bleak view of both celebration and humanity. Unlike more playful holiday horrors, this one feels punitive, as though Christmas itself is being punished for its excess. The murders are abrupt and mean-spirited, but what lingers is the tone. There's no sense of escalation toward catharsis, only a steady accumulation of cruelty. The film seems uninterested in redeeming its setting or its characters, allowing the holiday backdrop to rot in plain sight. What makes Don't Open Till Christmas disturbing isn't just its violence, but its contempt. It treats Christmas not as a sacred tradition to be corrupted, but as a hollow performance, one that collapses the moment someone decides to stop pretending. Directed by Renee Manzoor, Deadly Games, also known as Dial Code Santa Claus, is a Christmas horror film that feels disturbingly prophetic. Years before Home Alone reframed childhood ingenuity as harmless fun, this film took the same premise and stripped it of comfort, turning Christmas Eve into a siege. A young boy obsessed with action heroes and surveillance systems finds himself hunted through his own home by a violent intruder dressed as Santa Claus. Manzoor directs with precision and cruelty. The house becomes a battlefield of crawl spaces, traps, and half-lit rooms, each one reinforcing the idea that safety is an illusion maintained by routine. The Christmas decor doesn't soften the violence. It amplifies it. Toys become instruments of survival rather than joy. What makes Deadly Games so unsettling is its emotional core. The child's intelligence isn't empowering, it's desperate. Every tactic feels improvised, born from fear rather than confidence. The Santa figure, stripped of myth and warmth, becomes a relentless presence. Patient, invasive, and terrifyingly human. This is not a holiday fantasy. It's a home invasion nightmare staged under tinsel and carols, suggesting that Christmas doesn't protect the innocent. It simply gives danger better cover. Directed by Jeff Mandel, Elves is one of the strangest Christmas horror films ever produced. A chaotic collision of exploitation, folklore, and late 80s excess that feels less curated than unleashed. Set during the holiday season, the film follows a troubled teenager who uncovers a conspiracy involving Nazi occultism, incestuous cults, and demonic elves lurking beneath a Christmas tree farm. Nothing about elves is restrained. The mythology is incoherent, the tone veers wildly, and the film seems almost hostile to good taste. And yet, that lack of control becomes its defining feature. Mandel presents Christmas as a thin veneer stretched over something grotesque and decayed, where symbols of family and tradition conceal rot rather than reinforce unity. The elves themselves are crude, rubbery creatures, more pitiful than terrifying, but they aren't the real horror. The true discomfort comes from the film's willingness to drag taboo ideas into a season associated with innocence. It doesn't parody Christmas, it desecrates it, smearing ritual with exploitation and refusing to apologize. Elves shouldn't exist by any reasonable standard. That it does, and was released during the holidays, makes it feel like a cultural mistake frozen in time, a reminder that sometimes horror isn't crafted, it escapes. Directed by Theodore Gershuni, Silent Night, Bloody Night is a slow, somber Christmas horror film that feels closer to a curse than a slasher. Set in a small New England town, the story revolves around an abandoned mansion whose violent history begins to surface during the holiday season, pulling the present back toward a past soaked in secrecy and decay. Gershuni treats Christmas as an intrusion rather than a celebration. Snow muffles sound, streets empty early, and the town feels suspended in a state of quiet expectation. Violence arrives not as spectacle but as consequence, a reckoning tied to inherited guilt and long-buried crimes. The film's pacing is deliberate, almost mournful, allowing unease to seep in rather than strike. What distinguishes Silent Night? Bloody Night is its fixation on memory. The horror isn't driven by a single killer, but by a history that refuses to stay buried. The house at the center of the story feels less haunted by ghosts than by unresolved acts of cruelty, replaying itself through new victims. This is Christmas horror without irony or excess. No masks, no spectacle, just the slow realization that some traditions are built on foundations that were never clean, and that winter has a way of exposing what time tried to hide. Christmas Evil is not just the most unsettling film on this list. It's one of the most uncomfortable character studies ever wrapped in holiday imagery. Directed by Lewis Jackson, the film follows Harry Stadling, a lonely toy factory worker whose childhood trauma and rigid belief in Christmas morality slowly curdle into obsession. This isn't a slasher built on body count. It's a portrait of delusion unfolding in plain sight. Jackson treats Harry with disturbing sincerity. His fixation on naughty and nice isn't played for satire, it's portrayed as a belief system that gives structure to a life otherwise defined by alienation. As Harry dons a Santa suit and begins his nightly rituals, the film refuses to reassure the audience that this descent will be contained or corrected. What makes Christmas Evil so unsettling is its empathy. The film invites you to understand Harry before it asks you to fear him. The violence, when it comes, feels less like a rupture than an inevitability, the end result of a system that rewards devotion without compassion. This is Christmas horror stripped of irony and excess. No winks, no spectacle. Just a man who believed in the season too much, and a world that never knew what to do with that belief. Christmas horror endures because it violates something unspoken. They fracture rituals built on comfort, repetition, and trust. Lights, music, and familiar symbols become disguises, allowing cruelty and obsession to pass unnoticed until it's too late. None of these films feel safe, polished, or entirely correct. And that's exactly why they linger. They weren't designed to reassure, they exist because someone, somewhere, ignored good sense and let something wrong through the door. If any of these shouldn't exist nightmares stayed with you, let me know which one unsettled you most. And if you want more forgotten horror pulled from cinema's margins, like, subscribe, and join Silver Shivers, where comfort is never guaranteed.